Hello to all who have tuned in to today's show. Podcasting from Ontario, California. Welcome to Fractured Poet, a podcast for all of you poetically insane individuals out there who love getting lost in the art of poetry. I am your host, Katrina Wisniewski, just another person in the world obsessed with words, striving to make sense of it all. The topic for today's show is more along the lines of an anti-love perspective. Both of the poems I chose don't really defend or define love like some poems do. I will say, though, I have no personal thought into either of these poems. I do not relate to any of them, nor have I experienced quote unquote love to this degree. So here's the first one. It is called Betrayed. Intelligently misplaced, a crippled fairy tale told by yours truly. It began the 1st of July. He glanced towards me and said, "It's over." Taken by surprise, I asked him, "Why?" Turning away, he uttered nothing. Excuses were expected, but not one was recited. "I found someone else," he voiced to me. "You no longer satisfy me." Confused by his response, I knew there was more. His motive reeked like a bathroom stall on a hot summer's day. I plugged my nose and walked away. This was another poem that was written in that poetry class I took a while back. I had hoped that this one made the cut into the poetry book that was published, but unfortunately, it didn't make it into the book. Truth be told, though, I don't really know where this poem came from. I can't remember if this was a themed assignment or if I freelanced it. I think it's either Triolet or Villanelle, if I'm saying it right. When I started writing out this episode, I started to briefly recall that it might have been a specific assignment, but I honestly cannot remember. Anyways, I wrote it during that time, so I guess that's all that matters, right? However, thinking back to that day, the class had to turn in whatever poems he or she had written to the professor or for the professor. This was basically the process of elimination as to which poems would be included in the book or not. Each classmate has a few poems that circled their peers for review. Each classmate made comments, suggestions, or even adjustments to the poem being reviewed. Once the class was doing the peer review, those poems would eventually, once they were done, they would go to the professor. And I remember getting this particular poem back, to which I still have the original type tucked away somewhere. And the professor made a comment about how much she liked this poem. She liked the way I chose my wording and how I structured the poem. Just the content in general, especially towards the end about the plugging my nose and walked away part. So that kind of boosted my confidence as a poet just a little bit, knowing that I was on the right track. All right, so enough of that. Now for the second poem. This one is called A Love of Fools. You were not what I wanted. Such a hopeless mess. Disappearing without a trace. Leaving me to pick up the pieces. What the fuck? There was something about you. I couldn't put my finger on it. Something was always off. Why didn't I see it sooner? You bastard. You and your charming ways. I guess the joke was on me. How pathetic I must have been, falling for those words and that sexy voice. What a hot mess. I must have been the fool to fall so fast, because clearly the feeling was never mutual. All those years wasted, years that I can never get back, all because of you. Go fuck yourself. As I mentioned in the last show, I write poems that have absolutely nothing to do with me on any level, personal, professional, or otherwise. I just write whatever comes to mind. I can be listening to a song and then boom, out comes a poem. After I've completed it, I read it out loud and think to myself, how in the hell did I come up with this? Not all of my poems are based off of my life's experiences. And when I started the poetry thing, I never really thought about sharing my poetry with anyone, let alone a podcast like I'm doing right now. But now that I have opened up my options, I sometimes think that maybe someone who has stumbled on my poetry at one time or another is able to somehow relate to it. I know I have browsed different poets over the years to realize that a specific poem that I read is my life in a nutshell, or at least parts of it anyway. And I'm not saying that I hope someone's life reflects some of the poems I created, because some of the poems I have written can be very dark. And speaking as a reader myself, it's almost relieving in a way to read something that you can relate to. Like, you are not the only person going through these feelings, or whatever the case may be. Love can just simply suck booty. Okay, kids, I guess that about wraps up the show. Mucho thanks to all of my listeners out there. And to those of you who have tuned in or just tuned in, I hope you tune in next time. You can catch this episode and future ones at anchor.fm/Fractured Poet. This episode of Fractured Poet was written and produced by me, Katrina Wisniewski. Music by Alternative Rock Volume 1 and Rock Electronica Volume 4 from the website freeplaymusic.com. You can also follow me on Instagram at Fractured Poet. And as always, thanks for listening, and until next time.